The calm before the storm. The night was silent but full of tension, the kind that settled like a weight on the shoulders of anyone brave enough to be out on the road at this hour. Riley Thorne, a woman shaped by years of hard work and even harder battles, gripped the steering wheel of her white truck with steady hands. Her eyes, sharp and vigilant, scanned the highway ahead, every mile slipping away beneath the tires. Behind her, the truck bed was filled with more than just equipment. It was filled with 3 powerful, highly trained German shepherds. Havoc, Brutus, and Diesel, her companions in both life and war, weren't just dogs. They were her partners, her soldiers, and her protection. Riley had always believed that her past as a military K-9 handler had prepared her for anything life could throw at her. The scars, both visible and hidden, told the story of countless missions in which she and her dogs had fought side by side. They had faced danger and overcome it together, and she knew in her heart that they were ready for whatever lay ahead tonight. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 12:03 a.m. She still had 200 miles to go before she would be able to rest, but something in the air felt different tonight. The road stretched out before her, empty and quiet, the kind of road that seemed to go on forever, endless and desolate. Yet, Riley knew better than anyone that quiet roads were often the most dangerous. They were the ones that hid the dangers lurking just out of sight. As she drove, the familiar hum of the tires on asphalt was the only sound breaking the silence. But then, in the distance, something caught her eye. A faint light in the rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was just the reflections of streetlights or maybe another truck passing by. But the glow was growing larger, brighter. The low rumble of engines soon filled the night air, and Riley's instincts, sharpened by years of service, immediately told her what was coming. Motorcycles. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly, but she didn't panic. She had faced far worse situations than this. The bikers, however, were growing closer, and their engines were no longer just a background noise. They were purposeful, closing in fast, their sound rippling through the night like a warning. Riley's eyes flicked to the side mirror and saw them. A pack of bikers, their lights flashing like a predatory group circling in for the kill. She didn't have to look hard to spot their leader, Dax Viper Maddox, the man who wore his reputation like a badge. His leather vest, faded with age, bore the emblem of a skull wrapped in coiled snakes, a symbol that commanded fear in any who knew it. He rode in the front, his bike roaring beside her truck, as if daring her to make a move. Riley's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. These men were looking for trouble, and Riley had never been one to shy away from a fight. But this time, she wasn't alone. Havoc, Brutus, and Diesel were already on alert. The dogs had been trained for moments like this, moments when they could sense danger before anyone else. The air around them crackled with the tension of a fight yet to come. Havoc's ears twitched, his body coiled like a spring ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. Brutus, the biggest of the 3, stood firm, his muscles rippling with barely contained power. Diesel, the oldest, the most experienced, remained still, his eyes calculating and watchful. Riley could feel the energy shift in the truck bed, a silent understanding between her and her dogs. They knew their roles. They knew what was at stake. One of the bikers, a massive man with graying beard and a menacing smile, slammed his fist into the side of her truck with a force that shook the metal. "We're talking to you, sweetheart." His voice was rough, dripping with mocking amusement. Riley's gaze remained forward, her expression as calm as ever. The bike engines roared louder, but she didn't give an inch. The man didn't realize it yet, but the game was about to change. In the truck bed, Havoc's growl rumbled, deep and low. It was a sound of warning, not just to the bikers, but to anyone who dared to provoke. Brutus flexed his paws against the metal floor of the truck, his sharp eyes locked on the bikers like a hawk ready to dive. Diesel, the oldest, didn't move an inch, but Riley could feel his presence, quiet but immense. They were ready. They had always been ready. This wasn't just a ride through the night. It was a test of who would win in a battle of wills. Riley's heart rate remained steady, but adrenaline began to flow through her veins. This wasn't just about survival. This was about showing the bikers exactly who they were dealing with. She had no intention of backing down. Not tonight. Not ever. The first biker swerved, pushing his bike violently against the right side of her truck, jolting it sideways. Riley's jaw clenched as she quickly corrected the wheel, her experience behind the wheel evident in the smooth, controlled way she regained control. They were trying to force her off the road, but Riley wasn't a rookie. She had been trained for worse, and she wasn't going down that easily. If these bikers thought they could scare her, they had another thing coming. What they didn't know was that Riley's experience and training were about to meet their match. 3 highly trained military canines that had her back. But Riley didn't respond with force just yet. She wasn't one for needless aggression. The bikers were still closing in, trying to block her off. They weren't making any attempts to talk. They were escalating the situation. Riley knew exactly what they were up to, and she was more than prepared. The next hit came to the passenger side, and the truck jolted again. Riley braced herself, feeling the tires slip just a bit as she expertly corrected. There was no panic. There was only focus. The bikers weren't going to scare her. And then one of the bikers, a scared man with eyes full of malice, kicked her truck door hard. "Hey, sweetheart, you deaf or just plain tough?" His voice carried a hint of condescension, as if he truly believed she'd back down in the face of their intimidation. Riley's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and that's when she saw the pack's next move. 2 more bikers had sped ahead of her truck, blocking the road completely, forcing her to slow down. The trap was set, but Riley was ready. This was no longer just about getting away. It was about turning the tables on them. She wasn't the prey. She was the hunter. Riley's foot pressed harder on the gas pedal. She wasn't going to stop, not for anyone. But she had to make them think they had her cornered. As the gang closed in, Riley's mind was already working on the next move. The trap was about to be sprung. The trap is set. The engine of Riley's truck hummed steadily, her hand steady as she gripped the wheel, eyes locked on the winding road ahead. The once quiet highway had now become a battleground, the rumble of motorcycles vibrating through the air. The smell of the exhaust fumes clung to the night, mixing with the sharp scent of burnt rubber from their aggressive swerving. The bikers were closing in fast, too fast, and Riley's instinct told her they weren't just out for a joyride. They were targeting her. The night felt heavier, almost suffocating, as the bikers began to spread out like wolves surrounding their prey. 2 of them had already positioned themselves ahead of her truck, effectively cutting off her path. One of the remaining bikers taunted her from the side, his voice a low drawl that grated against her nerves, while the others began crowding in from behind. They had her cornered, or so they thought. Riley's grip on the wheel tightened, but her face remained calm, unflinching. She had seen much worse in her years as a K9 handler, face-down adversaries far more dangerous than a pack of bikers. Still, her heart rate began to pick up slightly, the anticipation of what was coming next sending a charge of adrenaline through her veins. She knew the risk, but she also knew how to outthink it. The bikers might be aggressive, but they didn't understand the true threat that lay just beyond their reach. In the truck bed, her 3 canines were already in position. Havoc, Brutus, and Diesel had been trained for situations like this. They were more than just loyal companions. They were highly skilled military dogs, sharp-eyed and battle-hardened. Riley didn't need to bark orders. The dogs understood their roles instinctively. The tension in the air was palpable, and they could feel it too. Their muscles rippled with readiness, their focus unwavering as they prepared for the signal. Riley glanced at the rearview mirror once more. The road behind her was almost entirely blocked now, but she wasn't panicking. She was plotting. The key was timing. She knew if she made one wrong move, the bikers could force her off the road. The real question was, how much were they willing to push before they found out just who they were up against? The leader of the pack, Dax Viper Maddox, had stayed close to her window, his sneer growing more obvious as he taunted her, trying to provoke a response. His earlier words still hung in the air. Late night for a lady to be driving all alone, don't you think? He thought he had the upper hand, that she was just another easy target to intimidate. But Riley didn't respond to threats. She never had. Instead, she focused on the road, the way her truck's engine thrummed beneath her, and how the bike's engines revved in anticipation of her every move. Suddenly, another biker, a hulking man with a grizzled beard, slammed his fist against her truck's side with a deafening thud. The impact rattled her, but she didn't flinch. "We're talking to you, sweetheart," he shouted, the roughness of his voice carried on the wind. But Riley didn't even glance at him. In fact, she didn't even tighten her grip on the wheel. She remained unshaken, and that, more than anything, seemed to rattle the bikers. The sheer calm in her movements was a contrast to the chaos of the situation, and it unnerved them. They thought she was alone. They thought she was an easy mark. But as their eyes flicked to the back of the truck, where the 3 military dogs stood watch, a sense of uncertainty began to creep into the air. In the bed of the truck, Havoc let out a low, deep growl, his sharp ears flicking toward the bikers as he prepared to leap into action. Brutus, the powerhouse of the group, lowered his stance, his massive frame seeming even more intimidating in the moonlight. Diesel, the oldest but most calculating, surveyed the bikers with a watchful eye, waiting for the signal. Riley could feel them shift, their bodies alert, ready for whatever came next. The dogs had always been her first line of defense, but tonight, they would be more than that. They were her message. You messed with the wrong person. Riley's foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, forcing the truck forward. She wasn't giving in to their pressure. If anything, she was drawing them in. She was leading them to exactly where she wanted them. A few more seconds passed, and the bikers began to tighten their formation around her. The truck rumbled beneath her, the tires gripping the road as Riley maneuvered carefully, but with a growing sense of purpose. The roar of the motorcycles was deafening now, and their shadows loomed larger as they closed in. One of the bikers swerved into her lane again, just inches from her truck's side, and Riley jerked the wheel to the left. This time, it wasn't a subtle maneuver. She moved sharply, catching the biker off guard. He swerved wildly, trying to regain control of his bike. For a brief moment, Riley watched him struggle to keep steady, his body leaning too far to one side. He managed to avoid crashing into her truck, but the chaos had already begun. The others were cursing, the sound of their frustration rising like a challenge. The leader, Viper, was no longer smiling. His earlier bravado had faded, replaced with an intensity that matched Riley's calm. "All right, so that's how it's gonna be," he muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing. Riley didn't take her foot off the gas. This was only the beginning. As the bikers attempted to block her again, she saw it, the sign up ahead, "Bridge 1 lane ahead." Her signal was simple. She flicked her high beams twice. It was a signal that meant one thing. It was time to set the trap. In the back of the truck, Havoc's ears twitched. Diesel lowered his body, his muscles coiled. Brutus let out a long, slow exhale, his chest rising and falling with a measured breath. They were ready. Riley's truck barreled forward, the engines of the bikes growing louder, closing in like a storm about to break. And then, without warning, Riley slammed her brakes. The truck jolted violently as it came to a stop, the tires screeching against the pavement. One of the bikers, caught off guard, couldn't react fast enough. His bike fishtailed, and he went down hard. The others scrambled to avoid him, their bikes skidding dangerously close to each other. But Riley wasn't stopping. She threw the truck into reverse, her eyes never leaving the road. The bikers, once confident in their numbers and their intimidation, now found themselves thrown into disarray. They weren't in control anymore. As the truck backed up, Riley's foot moved to the park position, the truck engine idling. The headlights lit up the empty stretch of highway, casting long, eerie shadows. The sound of the engines faded into an eerie quiet. And then Riley moved. With one swift motion, she reached for the latch on the tailgate. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, and the metal door of the truck slammed open with a sharp clang. That was all it took. Before the bikers could even process what was happening, Havoc, Brutus, and Diesel launched from the bed of the truck like missiles, their powerful bodies moving with the kind of precision that could only come from years of training. No barking, no hesitation, just pure, disciplined aggression. The bikers froze. They weren't dealing with an ordinary woman on a lonely stretch of highway. They were dealing with a force of nature, a trained soldier and her highly skilled K9s. The night was no longer silent. The sound of growls and fierce barks filled the air as the bikers scattered, their once cocky demeanor now replaced with fear. Riley stepped out of the truck, moving slowly, deliberately, her boots crunching against the asphalt. She didn't need to raise her voice or draw a weapon. Her dogs were already handling the problem for her. As the first biker fell to the ground, pinned by Brutus, Riley looked directly at Viper Maddox, her eyes cold and unreadable. "Still think I should pull over?" The dogs take command. The air seemed to hold its breath. The tension as thick as the night itself. What had started as a group of bikers trying to provoke a lone trucker had escalated into something much more. Riley stood calm and composed as her dogs, Havoc, Brutus, and Diesel, held the bikers at bay, their highly trained instincts taking over the situation with precision and authority. The remaining bikers, once brimming with overconfidence, now found themselves scrambling to regain control of the situation. The roar of the engines had been replaced by the low, menacing growls of Riley's dogs, who had already shifted into full defensive mode. The bikers, who had been cackling moments before, now looked uncertain, their faces painted with fear. Brutus, with his massive frame and intimidating presence, stood above the man he had pinned to the ground. The biker, a burly individual with a patchy beard and a look of defeat, lay struggling under Brutus's unyielding hold. The German shepherd's jaws were locked around his arm, pressing down just enough to immobilize him without drawing blood. The man's desperate, gasping breath did nothing to make Brutus waver. The dog's focus was absolute, his muscles tight and ready for Riley's next command. Brutus wasn't here for violence, but he was ready to finish the job if Riley ordered him to. Havoc, always the most explosive of the trio, darted forward, his sleek body moving with lightning speed. His golden eyes scanned the remaining bikers, sizing them up. One of the bikers, a younger man with wild eyes, found himself cornered by Havoc. The dog didn't hesitate. With one swift move, Havoc lunged forward, his teeth snapping mere inches from the man's leg. The biker stumbled backward, fear evident in his eyes. Havoc circled, but never let him escape. The dog didn't need to bite. His mere presence was enough to break the biker's composure. The young man now knew that running was not an option. He had no control here. Havoc had the upper hand, and he wasn't about to let the biker go without a fight. The man froze, his hands shaking as he raised them, trying to shield himself from the threat he could not outrun. Meanwhile, Diesel, the oldest of the three, took a more strategic approach. Diesel was the most calculated, the most patient. His eyes were sharp, and his body low to the ground, watching every move the bikers made. While the others engaged directly, Diesel took up a watchful position, moving slowly around the remaining bikers, ensuring they couldn't retreat without facing the consequences. His keen eyes never missed a shift in movement, and his poised stance signaled to the gang that no matter where they turned, they were being watched. Diesel's calculated approach was unnerving. He wasn't rushing into the fray. He was waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and the bikers knew it. Riley had expected this reaction. The dogs were trained for situations like this, and she had seen them work in far more dangerous scenarios. But the bikers, despite their bravado, had no experience dealing with the precision and discipline of military K9s. Riley knew that it was not about physical dominance. It was about control, and that's what her dogs had in spades. As the leader of this operation, Riley didn't need to shout or use force. The dogs had already established dominance, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the bikers to make their decision. Viper Maddox, still seated on his bike, looked around at his scattered gang. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched tightly, as his pride fought against the reality before him. He had been in countless confrontations, but nothing had ever been like this. He had underestimated Riley. He had thought she was just a trucker, a woman alone on the road who could be bullied into submission. But this was no ordinary woman, and these were no ordinary dogs. This was not a fight he could win. The leader's fingers tightened around the handlebars of his bike as his gaze shifted from Riley to the wreckage of his gang. He could see the biker who had slammed into the pavement earlier, struggling to get up, his arm still held firmly by Brutus. He saw the young man who was barely holding it together as Havoc circled him, teeth bared. And then he looked at Diesel, who was calmly assessing the situation, waiting for a signal. For a brief moment, Riley's gaze locked with Viper's. Her eyes were cold, unwavering, but there was no malice there, only the quiet confidence of someone who knew she had already won. Viper revved the engine of his bike, the sound piercing the air, but it felt hollow, desperate. He was facing a choice, one he hadn't anticipated. His pride told him to fight, to push back, but his fear whispered that to do so would be suicide. He was not dealing with some random trucker. He was dealing with someone who had fought battles before, someone who had the strength and the intelligence to outmaneuver him. "Make a choice, Viper," Riley said, her voice steady and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos around her. She hadn't drawn a weapon. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her dogs had already done the work for her. Viper's eyes flicked to the gang, his mind racing. He had no idea how to salvage this. His men were no longer the pack of intimidating bikers they had once been. They were broken, scattered, their bravado shattered by the presence of these 3 military dogs who had quickly dismantled their dominance. Viper's fingers trembled on the handlebars as he exhaled slowly. "Let him go," Viper finally said, his voice low, but Riley could hear the weight of his words. The fight had been taken out of him. He couldn't win this. He had underestimated her, and now his men had learned the lesson the hard way. Riley raised a single eyebrow and gave a subtle nod. It was all the signal Brutus needed. The large German shepherd lifted his jaws from the biker's arm, his movements precise and controlled. The biker, gasping for breath, scrambled away, his arm limp and trembling. But he was alive. He was lucky. The gang members, still reeling from the sudden shift in power, slowly began to retreat. The fight had left them. Their earlier cocky demeanor had crumbled, and now they were just a group of frightened men trying to regain some semblance of control. Viper revved his engine again, this time with a different sound, more of a retreat than a challenge. He looked at Riley one last time, but there was no fire in his gaze, no more attempts to dominate the situation. Just resignation. Without a word, he spun his bike around and signaled for his men to follow. One by one, the bikers turned their engines and sped off into the night, their once loud and threatening roar now a fading hum in the distance. Riley watched them leave, her eyes steady, but inside she felt a wave of quiet satisfaction. Her dogs had handled the situation. They had shown the bikers exactly what it meant to provoke someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. As the last of the bikes disappeared into the distance, Riley let out a slow breath. "Good job, boys," she said softly, her voice a quiet praise to the dogs who had just protected her in a way no human ever could. But as the echoes of the motorcycles faded, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. She had won the battle, but the highway still felt too quiet, too still. Something about the night felt unfinished. The final showdown. The quiet that followed the bikers' retreat was deafening. Riley stood still in the center of the road, her boots grounded firmly on the asphalt, as if absorbing the weight of the silence. The roar of the motorcycles had faded, and now all that remained was the distant hum of her truck's engine, idling softly in the background. Her 3 dogs, still alert, scanned the dark horizon with unwavering precision. They had done their job. The bikers had been put in their place, and the threat had passed. But Riley knew better than to think it was over. She wasn't naive. The pack had backed down, but the feeling in the air told her this wasn't the last time she would face them. This night, this encounter had left a bitter taste in her mouth. She had the distinct feeling that there was more at play here, something bigger than just a few bikers looking to bully a lone woman on the road. Something had changed in the night air, a shift, a presence, but she couldn't put her finger on it just yet. Brutus, who had been the most vocal during the fight, now stood at Riley's side, his massive chest rising and falling in slow, rhythmic breaths. Havoc, ever the vigilant one, paced near the truck, his golden eyes scanning every shadow that stretched across the road. Diesel, the ever-watchful elder, remained motionless, as if he sensed something Riley couldn't quite grasp. The dogs were at ease, but there was an edge in the air, a quiet warning. Riley glanced at the road ahead, then at the fading taillights of the bikers. They had gone, yes, but they were not far. She could feel it. She had been on the road long enough to know that people like Viper Maddox didn't just give up. His pride had been wounded, and it was only a matter of time before he came back with more force. She couldn't afford to wait for that moment. Not with the dogs in tow. Not with what they represented. The problem was, she couldn't go back. She couldn't run. She couldn't even afford to look weak, not now. Riley had long learned that strength didn't always lie in the force you applied. It lay in your ability to stand firm when everyone else backed down. And tonight, she was standing firm. Without turning around, Riley slowly made her way back to the truck. The lights from the dashboard illuminated her face as she climbed into the cab and gripped the wheel once again. The dogs hopped in behind her, their heavy paws hitting the truck bed with a steady rhythm. Diesel, ever the stoic one, laid down near the back, while Havoc and Brutus watched the road ahead, their eyes still sharp. As Riley began to pull away, she glanced in the rearview mirror once more. For a moment, she thought she saw something in the distance. Just a flicker, a shadow moving between the trees near the edge of the road. It was too far to make out, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something was following her, or perhaps it was simply a warning. Another test, a final challenge. But she wouldn't stop. She couldn't. The truck cruised steadily down the long stretch of highway, the only sound now the rhythmic hum of the tires against the road. Riley's mind raced as she thought back to the events of the night. It wasn't just about the bikers anymore. It was about more than that. They had tried to break her resolve. But that was something no one had ever been able to do. The dogs had shown their loyalty, and in return, Riley had protected them. It wasn't just about the mission they were on. It was about understanding each other on a level deeper than words. The highway stretched ahead, but Riley could feel the weight of something more pressing in the air. It wasn't just the bikers she was worried about. It was the knowledge that life had a way of throwing things at you when you least expected it. People who wanted to take from you. People who wanted to hurt you. But there was a beauty in standing tall despite the storm. And that was something that Riley understood all too well. The road ahead was long, and she wasn't alone anymore. She had a team, a family who stood beside her. The dogs had proven their worth, and she had proven hers. The highway would always be a place of challenges, of unknowns. But with every test, Riley grew stronger. With every battle, she learned more about herself, about the limits she was willing to push. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Riley found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The tension that had once gripped her chest began to release, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had handled the night with everything she had. And as the truck rolled steadily down the highway, Riley knew that whatever came next, she would face it with courage. With her dogs at her side, she was ready to take on whatever the road threw her way. The world had tried to break her, but it hadn't. Not now. Not ever. And she would never, ever back down. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.